Let's discuss the acculturation model and steps in acculturation by John Schumann. Acculturation model was introduced by John Schumann, who is an American linguist, in 1986. It claims that the successful second language acquisition does depend on, to some extent, how much contact the second language learner has with second language speaker. So this is important to understand that this particular model refers to having a substantial amount of contact of second language learner with the second language speaker or the speaker of the target language. Acculturation, according to Schumann, is the social and psychological integration of the learner with the target language group. So like Vygotsky, we also see that Schumann also proposes that acculturation, a process which incorporates or inculcates sociological and psychological aspect of integration of the second language learner with the target language group. Two variables responsible, once again, one is social and the other is psychological. So let's see the social factor and physiological factors responsible in the acculturation model. Number one, as we can see, as far as the social factors are concerned, the number one is social dominance. So what do we mean by social dominance here? Is the dominance of the target language in which the second language learner is moving to develop certain skills or language skills. Now, social dominance in the form of that group being more strong in terms of politically, culturally, technically, or economically manifestation. Integration pattern means that if the English language learner group chooses assimilation as the integration strategy, it gives up its own lifestyle and values and adopts the values or the lifestyle of the target group. So how much the learner is willing to take care of our assimilation process, how much the learner is willing to give up his lifestyle in order to adopt the lifestyle or the cultural values of the target language group. Enclosure refers to the degree to which English language learner or the second language learner group and the target language group share the same social constructs such as schools, clubs, parks, professions, and trades. Cohesiveness here means that if the second language learner group or second language learner is cohesive, it will tend to remain separate from the target language group. Size. If the size of the second language learner group is large, then the intra-group contact will be more frequent than the contact with the target language group. Cultural congruence. If the two cultures are similar and they enjoy the similar social activities, then there is more likely that the second language learning can be facilitated or can be learnt more easily. Attitude. If the second language learner has a positive attitude towards the second language or the target language group, then he or she can move towards the attainment of communicative competency more easily. Intended length of residence. The second language learner plans to remain in the target language environment, the more likely it is that the process becomes more conducive and effective in terms of developing a particular skill or developing a particular competency. Now we have the other layer which works in parallel, that is language shock, cultural shock, motivation, and ego permeability. Language shock basically is the disorientation caused by learning new set of rules or new linguistic forms which a learner or an individual exposed to. Cultural shock refers to anxiety, stress, and fears emerging from being exposed to a different and new culture. Motivation can be instrumental, it can be integrative, and it plays a very effective role in terms of facilitating or enabling a learner to be an active participant in the process. Ego permeability is the degree to which an individual gives up their differences in favor of the target language, overcoming the ego. How much a learner is willing to forego or give in his or her own personal differences, likings and dislikings. Brown also believes that acculturation in the target language consists of 4 stages: euphoria, culture shock, cultural stress and gradual recovery, and full recovery. Euphoria is a state where the learner gets excited about a new culture and the surroundings. Culture shock, as we have discussed, is mainly due to the being exposed to new set of values and beliefs, and anxiety and stress can emerge from that shock. Cultural stress and gradual recovery, that there are certain problems in the acculturation process. Partially the learner is adjusted and some of the matters are still to be taken care of, maybe the issues related to one's identity and views and beliefs. Full recovery is process of adaptation, assimilation or acceptance of the new culture altogether. Another researcher identified 5 factors for increasing psychological distance: language shock, culture shock, cultural stress, motivation, and ego permeability that we have just explained, that the learner needs to overcome this because they can create a distance in terms of the learning process, in terms of acculturation process. These 5 factors can obstruct or can be very effective in terms of creating a psychological distance between the second language learner and the target language setting. According to the critique of this model, when people from one culture move into an area dominated by another culture, there are going to be changes or adaptations made by people on both sides. The non-majority culture will be making most of these changes. During this acculturation process, there will inevitably be aspects of native culture that will be lost. Although it will not be as drastic or damaging as assimilation, the effects of cannot be avoided. Now, Berry feels that when people are moving from one culture to another, certain changes are bound to take place in terms of adapting, in terms of assimilating, and it is the non-majority culture which is required to make most of these changes. Yes, in the process, native culture aspects, some of the native culture aspects are bound to be lost, but it is not drastic. Still, the effects of that loss, or maybe in the form of identity, maybe in the form of norms and cultural views, it can still not be avoided. They are there. They do happen. So that's why it is this particular acculturation model is considered or faces the criticism because of this particular aspect, that the second language learner, in terms of getting into this process of second language acquisition, does lose some of his native culture's values and identity. Then the domination of mainstream culture can sometimes cause low self-esteem, and it can create or it can cause demotivation among the second language learners. The model does not provide an explanation or insight into the internal process responsible for the second. So basically, this particular aspect states that the acculturation model is more concerned with the social aspect of integration and does not take into account or does not provide the insight and explanation that how the internal process, which is the cognition process, works in this complete process of acculturation. To conclude, the acculturation model of John Shiven proposes identification with the second language community as the primary requirement of second language acquisition and advocates the social and psychological integration of the learner with the target language group.